Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Luisa Blanco. I am a professor of public policy and economics at Pepperdine School of Public Policy. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. We will learn about important policy issues and how to address them from a selected group of students who have worked really hard to develop a final product where they can apply the knowledge and the skills that they have developed throughout the program. The students presenting today were selected from two capstone classes, one led by Professor Bob Kaufman and myself. We have a very tight schedule for this seminar. Students will have around 8 to 10 minutes to present their work. I will give them heads up when they get to the 1 minute mark to their allowed time. It is likely we won't have time for discussion or questions, again, because it's a very tight schedule, but we will make sure to provide our students' emails to those attending this seminar in case you would like to communicate directly with them. If you have any comments or questions, you can email them. But thank you so much for being here with the students, and let's get started. So we're going to start with Katlyn and Emily. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming and for your time. My name is Emily Milnes, and my colleague Caitlin Koegel and I will be sharing with you our capstone, which examines a policy problem preventing trafficking victims from accessing legal remedies across the European Union. But first, we'd like to say thank you to Dr. Kaufman and to Dr. Graf, who facilitated this capstone and whose expertise was so critical in giving shape to the methodology. This capstone was completed as a research project for the International Justice Mission, which we'll refer to as IJM, an NGO that works around the world helping public justice systems protect the poor from violence. A common crime of violence is human trafficking, which involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. It's a global issue. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 40.3 million victims in the world today. While many governments are taking steps to address this, our focus is on the EU. The European Convention on Human Rights and the Charter of Fundamental Rights prohibits slavery and forced labor. In recent years, 20,532 victims were identified within the whole EU. So obviously that number is already low, but of that, just barely 9,000 received assistance. Assistance would be help with food, shelter, medical care, limited legal aid, and compensation. That's what we're focusing on. The EU has a mechanism for compensation to cover financial burdens as a legal remedy for trafficking victims. So whether it's in criminal court, civil court, or through a state fund, compensation is absolutely critical in bringing healing and justice to victims, because it gives them a practical way of moving forward. As the former US ambassador for the TIP office said, it's part of making wrong things right. In 2011, the EU enacted an anti-trafficking directive, which says member states shall ensure that victims of trafficking have access to existing schemes of compensation. So what happens is the 27 member states then take this directive, they ratify it and implement it into their national law. That's where the problem lies. In order to draft legislation at the EU level, which 27 different countries are all willing to adopt into their particular legal systems, the EU has to keep the language of the law vague. This creates three more problems. Because it's vague, it's not clearly defined, the law actually creates ambiguity and inconsistency in its application across state borders. It creates disparity among the member states as different nations have different methods of compensation, and it places the burden on the victim instead of on the member state. What happens here for trafficking victims is equivalent to being told that you can climb Mount Everest, but you're not given a guide, the proper climbing gear, or even told where the trailhead starts. That's what it's like for the victims. They're told remedies are available, but often they don't even know where to begin, and so they don't. So we began with our research question by asking what policy factors or elements are current barriers that prevent victims from accessing existing schemes of compensation. And our hypothesis was that EU legislation lacks clear, common, comprehensive policies regarding application to receive benefits and compensation, resulting in lack of clarity and conformity at the member state level. And now my colleague will share with you how we went about researching this.
Great, thank you, Emily. So before we began, we looked at specific criteria that we were going to use to evaluate the different laws. First, that the laws don't subject THV victims to further trauma. This means that they don't have to defend themselves against charges or unduly prove their victim status. Second, that legal rights are clear and remedies are accessible. This might mean there's translation for people who don't speak native languages. Third, that stakeholders have adequate capacity and coordination to turn court rulings into actual money in victims' hands. Fourth, that legal service regimes are established to assist the victims. This can take many forms, but for example, it can be temporary housing, financial aid, or even a counselor to assist with trauma. And then finally, issues of national sovereignty are also taken into consideration. This means states retain the ability to legislate on immigration and issue visas. Next, there are a couple of limitations to this study. First, time and scope. Originally, we wanted to do all 27 member states, but we didn't have the capacity as 2 people in 1 semester. Second, between the 2 of us, we only speak English. This meant that we relied on translations for a lot of our laws. Third, not all countries publish their THB data, and not all countries have the institutions to gather, process, and report accurate data. This means that we were stuck with what is published and what the member state claims. Fourth, the EU's directive is vague, as Emily mentioned, and that means that implementation is really in the context of 6 different legal systems, which we had to navigate. And then finally, as many of us know, the black letter law is usually different from what the actual implementation and enforcement is on the ground. And that is something we were not able to measure. All of that being said, from there, we were able to really build a database. So first we selected 6 countries because we didn't have the capacity to do others. And we wanted to get a mix of Eastern European countries and Western European countries. We also wanted to focus on countries that had really high numbers of THB victims identified. And then we wanted to implement or use a couple that had state funds already to provide a really robust comparison. So that's why we've included the United Kingdom, even though it is no longer an EU member state. From there, we looked at statutes and laws. We divided this into 5 different groups of statutes and laws to really make sure we were capturing every avenue of compensation. It includes state funds, criminal laws, civil laws, employment laws, and then even administrative laws. From there, and perhaps most significantly, we developed our variables. This is really important because we wanted the database to be able to be filled out by another person later and to be really accessible and usable for someone when they go in and they want to know exactly what a law says. So we spent a lot of time drafting, and we broke it down into 4 distinct categories. First, our background variables outline the context of the law, what country it's from, and the definition of the law. Next, we have our subpopulation category, which is minors and non-native aliens, because these are often more vulnerable populations and thus require a little bit more assistance in navigating compensation schemes. Third, and what you can see on the slide right here, is victim compensation and perpetrator punishment. This is really the meat and potatoes of our database, because a user can go in and see exactly what a victim can get under each law. And then our last group of variables were process and barrier variables. They really looked at barriers that might be timing or money or identification of a victim in accessing the legal regime. From there, we consolidated our database by putting in each law in each country across the variables. And then we were able to systematically analyze this. And that led to several policy implications, which Emily is going to now cover.
Thanks, Katlyn. IJM is already engaging in policy conversations at the local, national, and EU level, and will be incorporating this research into those conversations. So we wanted to provide them with short and long-term policy recommendations. First, short-term. Translations. A common issue is that if instructions on how to access compensations even exist, they're only available in the language of the country. What that means is if a victim is trafficked from Romania into Spain, they may be eligible for legal help, but it's not clear if they don't speak the language. This simple step of translating material into multiple languages will have an immediate impact in helping victims. Second, another common issue we identified is the need for stakeholder training. Local laws may mandate certain agencies officially identify victims so they're eligible to unlock those remedies. Often other government stakeholders or NGOs don't know who those people are. So capacity training and information sharing would go a long ways. And third, shift the burden from the victim to the state. When a trafficking victim is forced to pursue charges against the perpetrator in a foreign country where they don't speak the language and suffer trauma being in their presence, the burden should shift to the state. In the long term, member states could consider establishing or ratifying one legal system, or they could harmonize legislation and policies to ensure effective interagency coordination occurs across borders. Or the EU could amend its anti-trafficking directive, transferring the burden from victims to member states. This would be huge. There is a path forward. The European Commission has been tasked with looking into how countries may better implement existing rules for compensation. These recommendations fall directly within the purview of that mandate. And we want to end this presentation on a hopeful note. Yes, there is work to do. The work is slow and long. 40.3 million slaves in the world are 40.3 million individuals made in God's image with dignity and deserving of honor. As
1 minute, Mark.
Thank you. As we see IJM engaging in these policy conversations with the European Union, we should take heart. Governments, NGOs, faith communities, and advocates are not growing weary and doing good, and we shouldn't either. Here at the School of Public Policy, Dean Peterson often signs his email looking forward, and we should do that because hope in this work is ahead. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Emily and Katlyn. So we're going to the next capstone. Kassy, please go ahead. You are muted.
Sorry about that. Today, I'm going to attempt to evaluate a 50+ year alliance in just 8 minutes. So we're going to talk about the Turkey and NATO, or Turkey's membership in NATO and reevaluating that complex alliance. So just some background, NATO was founded in 1949 and had 12 member states that were signatories at that time. And following that, many countries wanted to join NATO, including Turkey. So Turkey was starting to align more with the West in the 1950s and trying to get into NATO. So one way they did that was they actually sent 5,000 troops to the Korean War. And in total, there's 25,000 troops over the entire war. And General MacArthur actually called Turkey the hero of heroes because their soldiers fought so well during this war. And it paid off because in 1952, Turkey did join NATO and things were going well at that time. Just to take a break and talk about the methodology, I conducted a very extensive literature review of dozens of books and articles, and then I also paid attention to current events because throughout my capstone, current events kept happening and I had to keep including things in my capstone, including the day before I had to include an article, and then the day after President Biden actually acknowledged the Armenian genocide. So this is a very, very timely issue. And then also I interviewed international law experts and former Ambassador Nikki Haley and her policy team. So just to talk about the NATO alliance, if one member is attacked, then there is a part of the alliance that says all members are attacked and they will engage in war. But NATO is not just a military alliance. It's also an alliance of countries that share values, the values of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. So it goes beyond just military, and we're supposed to have Western aligned countries that have our values. But there's a problem with that. The current president of Turkey, Erdogan, has been in power since 2003 as prime minister, and then in 2014 became president, and in 2017 actually expanded his power as president and got rid of the prime minister, and now sort of rules not as a dictator necessarily, but pretty close to it, and is allowed to pretty much overrule parliament and dissolve parliament. So he's gained a lot of power. And part of the reason for that was the 2016 coup, where the military tried to take power. And Erdogan used this coup as a way to imprison a lot of people. Almost 50,000 people are in prison or were imprisoned on charges of terrorism, which is 1/5 of Turkey's prison population. So pretty crazy. Human Rights Watch does talk about this and claims that he is jailing political opponents, not terrorists. Furthermore, there are many different things that are highly complex that Turkey has done in recent years Just to name a few of them, a lot of ISIS fighters traveled through Turkey during 2013 and 2014, and Turkey did not do enough to stop them. Additionally, in 2015, ISIS sold oil through Turkey, making $50 million a month. And Erdogan's son is even accused of being involved in that. And Russia has called Turkey out on this at the UN for having evidence of their involvement with ISIS. And in October 2016, they arrested American pastor Andrew Brunson, which was highly problematic because there is a Turkish man living in Pennsylvania that Erdogan really wants extradited to Turkey, and the US is refusing to do so. Erdogan accuses him of being behind the coup, and we refuse to extradite him. So Brunson was sort of used as leverage to try to get that man, Gulen, which the US still refuses to do, rightly so. And in 2017, highly problematic, Erdogan's security guards attacked American protesters on American soil, which led to Congress to denounce him. And the most important one, which is causing contention, is in 2018, Turkey purchased the Russian S-400 missile defense system, which is highly problematic because NATO standardizes its weapons in case there is a war, they're able to interchange things. And then additionally, there are concerns that this weapon defense system being in Turkey near American assets, our planes, our nuclear weapons, could allow Russia to spy on us. So we actually pulled Turkey out of the F-35 program and sanctioned them. How often do we sanction allies? And in 2019, they invaded Syria and attacked our Kurdish allies that helped us in the war against ISIS, which was very problematic and upset many Americans in the public opinion. And finally, they recently opened a gas pipeline between Russia and Turkey. Now, I also want to mention that it's not just government conflict. Public opinion of America and Turkey has gone down dramatically. If you look from 2002 to 2019, that is a dramatic jump. And then finally, my policy recommendations. The first hurdle here is, how do you get a country out of NATO? There's no provision in the treaty whatsoever, but after talking to international law experts, it is possible. The way to do it would be to have a unanimous vote to expel Turkey if that's ever necessary. Now, second, NATO must reaffirm its purpose. Is it still there to deter the Soviet Union, now Russia, or what? Because we have Turkey working with Russia and we have Germany opening pipelines with Russia. So we need to reaffirm our purpose and figure out exactly what the purpose of NATO is. Furthermore, we must consider or actually relocate our strategic assets away from Turkey and towards other allies in the region. NATO allies like Greece or non-NATO allies like Israel and our Gulf allies. Having Turkey there with a lot of the hostility is risky, and we don't know where Turkey is going to be in the next few years because things are just deteriorating. Furthermore, we also must make an attempt to find common ground. Turkey did try to buy our missile defense system, but because of our bureaucracy and partisan issues in Congress, they weren't able to. So we need to reevaluate that and find common ground with Turkey, and then use the common ground to further into more contentious issues like Gulen and the Kurds and Russia. Finally, if Turkey does continue to be a liability rather than an asset, NATO should consider removing Turkey from NATO or having some sort of suspension mechanism, because what we're doing right now is not working and there needs to be some reform because the relationship is only deteriorating. All right, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kassy. Very good. So we'll go with the next presentation. So Zach, go ahead, please.
Awesome.
Right on time, Kassy.
Thank you, Dr. Blanco. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Kaufman, thanks for the opportunity to share my capstone. Specialize at SVP in the International Relations and National Security, and I focused in my presentation capstone on China, and the title is The Middle Kingdom Restoration Problem. So 2019, December, when the pandemic broke out, my focus was really on national security and understanding why we changed from terrorism as our #1 threat to this near peer threat of China and Russia and this interstate competition agenda. And then I realized, we have to start to look at China differently. And my policy proposal was that China is now that unique case where sorry about that. This is now in a new case where the United States national security interest and really the biggest question we have right now is still unanswered. Why we still can't send forensic scientists to Wuhan province and to explore what happened in the outbreak of COVID-19 in order to prevent future outbreaks worldwide. And then understanding that President Xi, during the last couple of months of the outbreak, basically stopped the distribution of our PPE and critical assets needed for to save lives. And what the problem is that we have a bad actor in the global system. And it's all started through the background, 1989 Milnes massacre, where basically this was proof to the world that China was not going to allow any movement of student activists. And basically that massacre killed thousands. What the biggest issue is, last year, this platform we're using right now, Zoom, basically answered the Chinese authorities and then suspended US activists trying to have a Zoom meeting about the same issue last year to kind of just mourn the deaths and to discuss the ongoing issues. So 11 years pass, everyone forgets that China's a bad actor, and our greed, including Boeing and a lot of our big corporations, wanted access to the Chinese economy. And this closed economy, President Bill Clinton tried to add human rights provisions into the entrance of the World Trade Organization. He was denied by our own lobbyists. And what happened is the Tibetans, the Uyghur Muslims, the Falun Gong practitioners, Taiwanese, Hong Kong democracy activists have all suffered since we have not been able to see what is going on inside China. So who are we competing against? China has state-owned enterprises. This is what they deem as companies that are essential for their economy to grow. Think of like infrastructure, constructions, large businesses, think of Huawei. Basically, Huawei has pushed for us to get joint ventures, which basically brings foreign companies in, foreign assets. Those foreign assets, those foreign companies give about 51% of their stakehood to be able to operate in China. And then from that perspective, China's be able to learn and duplicate their systems. Why is this a problem to our economy? Well, China tried bringing their companies into our stock exchange. The stock exchange commissioner was denied the right to do any audits on their companies. And basically, their state-owned enterprises, their reports and revenue reports are state secrets they cannot share. So understanding the background of the problem of this policy and how this is not an attempt to detangle or to detach these two economies, but it's really just to look at this. And what I wanted to do is look at different perspectives. I want to understand the CCP, why they were doing what they were doing. And I had three perspectives for this comparative analysis. Number one was basically we provoked China to act the way they have, and they had to secure the regime. Since 2000, we've had famous foreign analysts like Henry Rowland basically state by 2015, China will be democratized. The belief was that if we allow their economy to democratize, slowly the people would want more and want better from the government. China sees it as a complete threat to their power and sees all of our ideas and beliefs as external threats to them. Hence the Chinese document number 9. This is a hardline agenda to all the CCP members, which is 85 million Chinese members that basically have to make sure that they remove any stigma of free oppression, free press, individual rights from any entity, internet, or written format from China's culture. And then they look over the seas, the first island chains are all pro-American islands. Either they have American forces from after World War II in Japan, or the pro-American like Taiwan and the Philippines. So they feel boxed in. So number 2 was this, they have this destiny. They feel like they are destined to be the leader of international order, to restore this middle kingdom. And they believe through economic growth, they are fascinated with how the United States took over the world currency after World War I. And they believe after 2008 represented that the West could not bank themselves, and they have the road to renewal. So by 2049, they believe that they are destined to basically replace the dollar with the yuan and have this community of common destiny, which basically means anybody that's in the Belt and Road Initiative, which is over 60 plus countries, they will start nodding to what the CCP puts out in its outbriefs. And understanding basically kind of the nature, the power distribution in East Asia. My last one was basically kind of seeing where we fit into this whole thing and how we can be vigilant in countering the CCP. right now we have the best advantage right now with, Japanese, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines. They still believe, that in their governments, they still believe they don't want to live under this rule of the Chinese Communist Party. And through the nature of their actions in the South China Sea and East China Sea, China feels destined to basically bully their way to the top. And the belief set is that the leader has already proclaimed to his people and his party of 85 million people that China will be the #1 country, will have a large economy, will be the manufacturer country of the world by 2025 and 2049. So China presents a similar existential challenge that Germany was during the 1930s as they rose and became a powerhouse, and then also the Soviet Union at the end of World War II and into the end of the Cold War. So my policy recommendations is that we have to find ways to incentivize our companies to basically find ways to move our supply chains so we don't have any issues like we did during the fallout of COVID-19. Right now, China is trying to use rare earth metals as a monopoly. They're not the only country with it. As you know, rare earth metals are basically everything we use for our cell phones, our laptops. It's not going away. So we need to find companies that want to explore and find more rare earth metals.
1 minute, Mark.
Thank you. And we need to figure out this Great Wall of Democracy is what I consider it, which is basically this idea that, the status quo it's good. Everyone can trade. The seas are open. China is really just trying to establish its own power, its own sphere of influence in East Asia. And by doing so, if they use the BRI, they'll basically control all Eurasia as far as trade goes. And we have to figure out how we can support them. There's 6 land disputes right now. China has no rights to any of these claims. We need to continue to support a Quad Alliance, which is basically Japan, the US, Australia, and India. And my last one is the biggest problem here is that we can't address the genocides that have been happening in Zhejiang province. The first independent study basically proved that China has violated every provision in the UN Genocide Convention. And if we continue with the bipartisan support, we can finally start to investigate this and show the world that China is a bad actor hidden in.
1 minute, Mark.
And I am complete.
Thank you, Zach. Good job. So we go with the next capstone. So that will be Deja. So Deja, you have the forum now.
Okay, hi, my name is Deja, and I'm going to be presenting on how we can address the deficit of school-based mental health personnel within the United States. Thank you to Dr. Blanco for allowing me to present today. So the current health and mental states in the United States school districts. So basically in 2012, it began where Kristen Ware, she discusses in her article called School Psychologists Feel the Squeeze. She talks about how education budget cuts in 2012, federal and state level, forced school districts to make tough choices when it came to their school personnel. And so she discusses how the mental health staff, they were the ones who experienced the most cuts because they're the ones who were seen as, least necessary in schools. And so in 2019, fast forward a little bit, a couple of researchers led by Amy Whitaker, they found that between the years of 1999 and 2015, students were reporting in their surveys that the presence of law enforcement in schools, which are like, the resource officers or campus police officers, they increased by 16 percentage points, but students also reported that in this time frame, that school counselors only increased by 5%. So it was a big difference in how many were increased counselors versus law enforcement. And so additionally, this was a map from 2016 that kind of shows the ratios of student to school psychologist. And so in 2016, only 4 states had the recommended ratios of students to school psychologists. And the recommended ratios by the National Association of School Psychologists, they published this number in 2013, is that there should be 1 school psychologist to each 500 to 700 students. And so in 2016, the average ratio across the United States was actually one school psychologist to every 1,526 students. So that was like way above the recommended ratio. And so my policy question for my capstone was, what is the best way to address the deficit of school-based mental health personnel in the United States? And so for this study, I actually did a quantitative study. I used data and quantitative study. And so I used data from Connecticut, and I analyzed 128 school districts in Connecticut between the years of 2015 to 2018. The reason that I did Connecticut is because that the Department of Education in Connecticut has a public website that provides a lot of information about their school districts and their student population. And so this allowed me to do a more in-depth analysis than if I had just picked another state or school district with limited information. And so my main policy variable for this analysis was students to mental health personnel ratios. My dependent variables were school performance index in English, language arts, and math. And so this means like basically each district, their math and reading scores on various exams, they're kind of averaged together to get this score. My independent variables were the enrollment rate of students, the absenteeism rate of students, so how many days of school that they missed, the suspension rate of students, and the student to certified teacher ratio. And then, so like I said, I also included student demographic and district information like gender, ethnicity, percentage of local, federal, and state funds that schools got. So these were a couple of other variables that I also included. And so for my analysis, I conducted a bunch of regressions, some that considered time and district variations, but for this presentation, I will not discuss those results. So my policy analysis recommendations, my first recommendation, and this is kind of a twofold recommendation, but the first part of my recommendation is that we need to decrease the ratio of school psychologists to each student to the recommended ratios by the American Psychological Association. This is because this will allow more students to obtain in-school help for their mental health needs. It would also eliminate the need for providing additional teacher training on how to have a relationship with their students in which they could actually help them with their mental needs. And it would also allow the problem of school counselors becoming more overwhelmed with class scheduling and college readiness to do those jobs instead of having to, focus on the lack of time counseling actual students. And so this was like the first part of my recommendation. But the second part, to do this, we will need to address the mismatch of provisions for updated Medicaid policies between state and the federal level. So in the Affordable Care Act that President Obama updated, he basically put in there that every school psychologist is qualified to be a qualified health personnel. So this means that they should be able to bill students Medicaid services for their services for students. And so also in this, in the Affordable Care Act, it increased the amount of students that were able to get Medicaid and also allowed for more mental health services to be included in this coverage. So addressing this problem would help because all of these things were included in there, but there's a mismatch because at the state level, state officials can choose whether they want to allow school psychologists to be counted as qualified health personnel. And so that's why there's a mismatch. It's written in the language, but it's not like you don't have to do it as a state. So in doing this, addressing this problem would reduce the strain of funding from school districts. It would also officially make every school psychologist a designated qualified health personnel, and it would be enforced at the state level so that there wouldn't be any variation like there is now. And also it would be an equitable solution for solving this problem because as we saw in the map before, in 2016, only 4 states were meeting the American Psychological Association's recommendation for the student to psychologist ratio. And that's all. Let's see, stop share.
Great on time. Thank you, Deja. So we go with the next presentation. So that will be John.
Sure. Let me share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see that? All right, so
Put it as a slideshow. Perfect, perfect.
hello, my name is John Hayes. Good afternoon. Today, I chose to do my capstone on the effectiveness of plastic ordinance in Santa Monica and really the surrounding area. So let's just jump into the problem. The problem is that we have a lot of plastic waste, not just in Santa Monica, but across the world. If our current consumption and manufacturing norms continue, there could be another 710 million metric tons of waste introduced into the environment over the next 20 years. This is getting into our oceans, into our ecosystems, into our food chains, and even into us. And I'm not a medical doctor, but having a low-grade petroleum byproduct in your body doesn't particularly sound very healthy. So to do something about this, Santa Monica, along with many other cities, have implemented policies to mitigate this growing problem. There are plastic fees on plastic bags at grocery stores. And just to be a little more precise, in 2018, Santa Monica City Council revised existing ordinance to require all food and drink service providers to use only marine degradable straws, lids, plates, trays, and other things of that nature. But I want to know, are these policies really effective? Are they reducing plastic waste? Especially when we consider Santa Monica is surrounded by other municipalities at various levels of sustainability. So to analyze this further, I looked at debris databases, debris collection databases. I analyzed recycling plastic tonnage reports from the city of Santa Monica, and I conducted interviews with city officials and recycling experts to gain further insights. So my research question, again, what is the relationship between Santa Monica's plastic ordinances and plastic waste? Is it reducing? Is it staying the same? I'd like to know. My hypothesis is that yes, these ordinances are having some net positive impact on reducing waste, but could there be better policies that Santa Monica could be pursuing? So my methodology, I looked at two main descriptive data sources. The first being the TIDES database. TIDES is an open public data system that contains one of the world's largest compiled reports of recovered trash. I particularly looked at Ventura County, Orange County, and LA County, where Santa Monica is, to analyze trend lines and yearly amounts of plastic collection and plastic accumulation. The second source I used was tonnage reports from plastic recycling from the Resource Recovery and Recycling Division of Santa Monica. This goes back from 2011 to 2019 and looks at various types of plastics from PET, HDP, and miscellaneous plastics. For my qualitative data, I interviewed 6 policy experts and recycling experts within Santa Monica. I asked some questions such as, what are some of the most significant challenges faced by city officials when introducing plastic waste ordinances? What are the most and least successful of these ordinances? And what they would recommend to future policymakers to deal with this growing problem at the state, federal, and other levels. So as you can see here, this is the first figures from derived from the TIDES database. It is a visual comparison between the individual counties and 4 different types of trash recovered between 2015 and 2019. Plastic grocery bags, plastic cups, plastic takeout containers, and straws and stirrers. And what is interesting about this chart is that the only item that saw a decline in LA County from 2018 to 2019 was straws and stirrers. And I thought this was pretty interesting. I got looking at this. And actually in 2018, California Assembly Bill 1884 was passed at the state level, and this regulation prohibited dine-in restaurants from automatically providing plastic straws to customers unless they specifically asked for them. So really the only item that was connected to a significant reduction in plastic waste wasn't at the city or county level, but at the state level. Going forward, I looked at the recycling tonnage charts from plastic from Santa Monica. And overall, the results were kind of ambiguous. A lot of them were flatlined. There was some decline in HDP color, but HDP itself actually rose. So the overall trend lines in this were not very promising, unfortunately. Upon my expert interviews, they yielded 4 major common themes regarding plastic waste and plastic ordinances. The first being that economic incentives for plastic recovery, or really the lack thereof. A lot of them talked about the impact of state and federal legislation. They discussed the need for extended producer responsibilities regarding plastic waste. And lastly, a lot of them tended to agree that we need a better emphasis on more public education regarding recycling and reduction practices. But just to sum it up, they all tended to agree that we need regulations at all levels of government to foster what is known as a circular economy for plastics. This can be done through minimum content laws, bottle bills, just any way to increase the value of plastic waste to increase the profit incentive to reuse, reduce consumption, and recycle, not just for individuals, but for companies. So for my policy analysis, for any policy to really be effective, should have 5 main policies. One's got to be politically feasible. It's got to be cost effective. It actually needs to reduce plastic waste. It's got to be timely, and it's got to have sustainability in the long term. So alternative 1 is that we could increase regulations and fees. This is already being done, but sustainability of this is really uncertain, as we've seen before. Alternative 2, we could encourage better recycling. Again, this is happening in some places, but there's just a lot of fluctuations in price of plastics. Consumer habits change over time, and overall demand for virgin plastic remains very high. However, with alternative 3, we could extend producer responsibilities via minimum content laws. We see this more increasingly common in Europe and some American cities. It strengthens the circular economy for plastic, increases demand for waste plastics through regulations, and actually in 2020, AB California Assembly Bill 793 was signed, and this new regulation requires that all plastic bottles sold in California to contain at least 15% post-consumer resin recycled content by 2022, 25% by 2025, and 50% by 2030. So this is already kind of in the works and growing from day to day. So for my conclusion, my policy recommendation, this problem is plastic pollution. It's complex, it's entrenched socially, economically, and politically, and there's not going to be any fast or simple solution to this issue. And while local ordinances like Santa Monica, they have had some positive impact in reducing a little bit of plastic waste, the current strategies they're not proving to be enough. We're going to need more resilient solutions that entail a unified effort at the state, federal, and perhaps even international levels. So because of that, my recommendation is that Santa Monica extends producer responsibility by supporting minimum content laws for all plastics at the state level. This factors in full cycle costs, life cycle costs for products. It has greater financial incentives to recycle, reuse, and reduce consumption. And yes, it would increase the cost of some plastics, especially single-use plastics. But the alternative is that we're just going to keep increasing this wasteful amount of plastics. Only 9% ever get recycled. The rest get dumped in the ocean and in landfills.
1 minute, Mark.
Thank you. So I believe that trade-off is worth it. And with that, concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, John. Yeah, great on time. Thank you. We're doing great. You guys are awesome. So we're going to the last presentation. So that will be Chloe and Susie. Please go ahead.
Let's see. Melissa, would you mind allowing me to share my screen?
Sorry, 1 second.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you should be all set.
Perfect. Well, thank you all today. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Today, my colleague Susie and I are going to be talking about best practices for financial education programs for city officials working predominantly in Hispanic communities within LA County. In order to start off our presentation today, we wanted to draw attention to our policy issue. Unfortunately, there is a significant lack of financial knowledge nationwide. This reality is shown through one notable study that said that 50% of respondents were actually unable to correctly answer interest rate questions. And unfortunately, a lot of demographic groups also have a higher level of a lack of financial knowledge. Notably, Hispanic populations were the least likely to correctly answer these questions related to inflation. And unfortunately, this lack of financial knowledge can translate to some real significant financial challenges for American families. A majority of American families are savings limited, income constrained, and debt challenged. And this also is exacerbated for Hispanic populations. Notably, they experience higher levels of financial instability Actually, 40% of Hispanic households live paycheck to paycheck. They were also more likely to be unbanked, meaning that they would not have a checkings account or a savings account. And they also tend to have a distrust in financial institutions and banking institutions in general. In order to address this, financial education programs have actually gained popularity in recent years. And though these vary in scope and in structure, their overall goal is to allow individuals to make more well-informed financial decisions. Overall, there are mixed results on the effectiveness of this. A 2020 meta-analysis on financial education programs also actually saw a positive effect of these programs on altering financial behavior. However, the literature does note a need for more targeted and culturally appropriate programs.
Thanks, Chloe. So as Chloe mentioned, many families in our communities are limited in their savings. They are also income constrained, and many have accrued debt. And so we also wanted to take a look at the psychological impact of facing resource scarcity and how that scarcity can impact their financial decision-making for the long run and the short run. So some examples of that is the benefits now, cost later concept. So for example, if somebody's mind is constantly having to think about an unmet need, they may not be willing or may not be able to really think of other important needs that they are facing as well. So for example, the benefits now, cost later concept, if somebody has an unmet need that they may need to pay for now, they may not have to or be able to consider the future cost of using like a credit card or something of that sort. The second concept is the degree of difficulty. So a lot of times if somebody's mind is overtaken by an unmet need, they may not be able to focus the required attention for a really important financial decision. And lastly, if somebody is constantly thinking of an unmet need, they may not be able to really focus their time on future financial planning. It could contribute to mental overload. And also one actual benefit of that is that they could actually catch on to hidden costs that somebody or their counterpart who is not facing financial scarcity may not necessarily notice. And so with our project, we seeked to answer first, what are the financial experiences and challenges of Hispanics in the San Gabriel Valley within the LA County area? And two, how do the concepts of scarcity mindset and decision-making processes impact financial behaviors and mental health? And lastly, what are best practices for community leaders to offer targeted financial education programs for Hispanics?
So for our methodology, we chose to take a two-pronged approach. We did a qualitative analysis as well as a quantitative analysis. In relation specifically to the qualitative analysis, we conducted expert interviews with city leaders that are working in predominantly Hispanic areas in the San Gabriel Valley of LA County. Overall, these were very helpful interviews in that they provided a description of the financial challenges that they see Hispanic populations facing in their day-to-day work. And they also provided an overview of the current programs that they offer, as well as recommendations by the experts to enhance the effectiveness of these financial education programs to make them more culturally appropriate. There are some key results that I would like to draw your attention to. When we ask the experts specifically about financial challenges for Hispanic populations, it's important to note that lots of them mentioned distrust in financial institutions, as well as populations being unbanked, both of which were something that we actually saw in our literature review as well. When our attention in the interview turned toward looking at themes presented by the experts in relation to enhancing program effectiveness, 5 of the experts actually mentioned a need to enhance collaboration with community partners. Another common theme that came up was a need to understand and relate to the targeted audience. So for example, some of them mentioned doing this by having teachers that share a cultural identity with the target audience, while others mentioned sharing some sort of expertise in the sort of job or business that they're a part of. Additionally, lots of the experts mentioned a need to find ways to build trust within this community as well.
Thanks. For the quantitative analysis portion, We analyzed the data from the Mobile Money Diary project from the Understanding America study in order to learn more about the experience of Latinos and how scarce financial resources could impact their mental health and stress. And so although we didn't necessarily find any significant results, that we kind of attributed that to our sample, which was highly educated. 51% of the participants were of medium income and only 19% were of first-generation immigrants.
So when we turn our attention to our policy recommendations, we wanted to again have two recommendations in order to enhance the effectiveness of these programs to make them more targeted. The first recommendation really focused on trying to address this issue of building trust within the community. And so in order to build rapport with Hispanic populations, we recommend creating a biannual door-to-door campaign in Hispanic neighborhoods, which would essentially bring providers to clients in an area that they feel most comfortable. This would be beneficial as it would allow these communities to learn more about available programs that are being offered. Actually, one of the experts that was interviewed mentioned that he had actually utilized this approach when trying to work with Hispanic populations in order to have them participate in the census within his community, and he found this as an effective way to build trust and rapport. It's also noteworthy to mention that we would recommend partnering and identifying local Hispanic community leaders and having them participate in this campaign as well in order to enhance buy-in within the community.
And the second recommendation is to offer wraparound community services. The reason for this is that when you offer wraparound community services like support with with government programs, educational programs, it could potentially alleviate some of those unmet basic needs that somebody in the community may be facing, which would then allow them to engage more actively on making more informed financial decisions, but also more forward-thinking financial decisions. And the second is to offer those targeted financial support programs, right? Understanding that the Latino community may respond differently to certain approaches. And then this would also allow for cross-sector partnerships in the community, working with community agencies and partners who are familiar with this population. And we believe that if we use these policy recommendations, we could really contribute to enhancing the state of the Latino population financial decision making and hopefully increase their financial stability. Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, excellent timing. Wow, I'm amazed by all your hard work. Thank you so much. So I will say, if people want to put on the chat some congratulatory notes to our graduating class, if you want to use some of the reactions, then please go ahead. We did great with the time, so I really thank everyone for your hard work and especially also for the audience to be here with us and celebrate with the students. So being mindful of everyone's time, I think we're gonna close the session. Excellent work. For those of you who have any comments or feedback or anything you wanna share with the students, we will be providing to you a recording of this session, and then also the emails of the students with their capstone titles and then their emails if you want to connect with them in the future. But thanks everyone. Thanks to School of Public Policy for helping us do this. And of course, thanks for the students for their hard work and congratulations. Very exciting. Thank you. So we'll close the event and stay well.